And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. It's Apologetics Dojo. And yes, I am Gary Michuta, your host and sensei for this hour. And we got a great show in store for you today. On the other side of the break, we're going to have our good friend Ken Litchfield come on to the show. He's going to talk about how Christianity evolved out of Judaism, which is going to be a very fascinating topic indeed. And talk about great stuff. You know, just a reminder, it's only a couple days off. It's hard to believe how time is flying. But June 13th, folks, get your calendars out. Make a notation. Maybe put something up on your Google Calendar. June 13th, we're going to have the men's conference with Jesse Romero, Ruben Nava, and Tim Gordon. You don't want to miss it. And also on June 20th, our good friend, Jerusalem Jones himself, Steve Ray, is going to give his own kind of special conference, and it's going to be a virtual pilgrimage. And that's going to be June 20th on Virgin Most Powerful Radio live stream on Facebook. So if you haven't already checked out the details, please do go to our flagship website, which is virginmostpowerfulradio.org, and you'll get the details. You'll see the banners right up there on the homepage. And check it out, folks, because lots of goodies, lots of things that we produce here. And by the way, I want to thank everybody for doing your apologetics in place, evangelizing, sharing the good news, telling people about the program. We really appreciate it here. It's cool to see the subscription rate go up and also see more viewers here. And speaking, that doesn't mean that I love the veterans any less. Indeed, I want to give my shout out, as I do on every show, to you good guys watching on live stream on Facebook, YouTube, and the rest. Hello, everybody. Hi, Joan. Hi, Ricky. Hi, everybody. Great to have you on board. And also, I want to welcome all of you listening on radio around the United States and around the world via podcast through the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.org website or through our handy-dandy phone app. Yeah, you can listen to all the great programs of Virgin Most Powerful Radio through our phone app. So if you haven't downloaded it onto your phone, you should. Not only do you have access to Hands-On Apologetics, you can take it anywhere you want, but it's got lots of cool freebies as well. So check it out, folks. If you download it, like I said, I don't think you'll regret it. It's got lots of great stuff. And like I said, you can access all the great shows here on Virgin Most Powerful Radio. As you know, every episode we do a Finding the Fallacy. We look at informal fallacy. That's part of our critical thinking exercises every day so that our synapses gaps are crackling with whatever they crackle with. And today's Finding the Fallacy is the single authority fallacy. Excuse me, single authority fallacy. Come on, Gary, get control here. And we also meet an early church father. Today's early church father, I don't think is very well known unless you're an apologetics geek like myself, and that is Rufinus of Aquinas. So we're going to learn about him in a second. Let's see. If you have a question for Ken Litchfield when he comes on the other side of the break, you can give us a call toll free at 888-526-2151. That is 888-526-2151. Or you can always send your emails. There are emails, and the dojo mailbox address, for those who maybe you're a newbie, is questions@handsonapologetics.com. Very easy to remember, right? Questions@handsonapologetics.com. Hands On Apologetics, by the way, is my home website, along with GaryMichuta.com. So you can check that out if you are interested in any of my books or talks or just information about the show or what have you. Okay. Let's see. Let's jump right into the Finding the Fallacy. Today's Finding the Fallacy is single authority fallacy. When an argument holds that a conclusion is likely to be true precisely because the one who holds it or is presenting, it lacks authority. It is a fallacious appeal to the common man. Okay, let me repeat that. Single authority is argument that holds that a conclusion is likely to be true precisely because the one who holds it is or is presenting it lacks authority. Okay, yeah, that's weird. Actually, I've heard of single authority a different way, but I can see where this is. It'd be like the opposite of appeal to experts, or sometimes just appeal to authority. That somehow it's because a person isn't lettered, they're just an ordinary Joe or ordinary Jane, that somehow then their information must be more credible than the hoi polloi academia types. So I guess this would be a cousin to the propaganda technique of the appeal to plain folks propaganda technique, because for some reason or other, it's just part of human nature. We tend to trust people who are a lot like ourselves and distrust those who are not like ourselves. So with propaganda technique, the appeal to plain folks is to show that a particular person as being just like you, and therefore you can trust them. And that's often just done with smoke and mirrors. And in fact, sometimes you don't want people just like you. Especially if you're talking about like the existence of God, you want somebody who knows their stuff in philosophy, who has studied the issues. Then you can trust them, right? You don't want a plain folk person just giving their own 2 cents. Anyway, that is our fallacy for today, the single authority fallacy. Well, we jump to Rufinus. Rufinus is a very interesting early church father. His name is almost always associated with St. Jerome. In fact, he may have been a kind of Jerome had it not been for Jerome. Rufinus, by the way, is often known as Rufinus of Aquilina, but he was born in 345 AD in North Italian village of Concordia, which is just a few miles west of Aquilina. He died shortly after Alex's sack of Rome in 410, and he's buried in Sicily. As a youth in Rome, he was a fellow student of Jerome, who had come there from Stridon in Dalmatia. And there began a friendship. Actually, more than a friendship. Jerome was best buddies with Rufinus, almost to a shocking extent. And it was only after they part, and I'll talk about that in a second, very bitterly, they become the worst enemies. So they switch from the best of friends to the worst of enemies. In fact, there's a little clip about how upon hearing that Rufinus was coming over to sea on his way to see the holy places, Jerome, who was living in the Bethlehem, had written, "Never did a sailor tempest-tossed so look for harbor, never did parched fields so thirst for rain, never did mother on the curving shore keep so anxious a watch for her son. There is no way of buying love, friendship that can end was true." That's Jerome's word for his best buddy Rufinus. But the friendship quickly died, however, because they were both ardent fans of the Alexandrian scholar, theologian, Origen of Alexandria. They both were great champions of Origen, very attracted to his work, especially in biblical studies. However, Jerome noticed that some of Origen's speculations were heretical, and so he began to criticize Origen, and that was the thing that separated him and Rufinus, because Rufinus continued to be an ardent follower and defender of Origen against Jerome, and that ultimately ends up in a quarrel between he and Jerome. And knowing Jerome, as we do on this show, St. Jerome was not a Sloanus Casey, very humble, soft-spoken type saint. Jerome loved to fight, and when he fought, there was no holds bar fighting. And so when he became enemies even with his best friend, he showed no moderation. In fact, his attacks on his former best buddy Rufinus continued even beyond the grave. Rufinus was dead, and Jerome, when he knew it, he said of him, "Cato without, Nero within." So unfortunately, they never were able to patch up their broken friendship, and the cause of the quarrel is not now so important as the quarrel itself. Jurgen's Faith of the Early Fathers tells us both were accused of being Origenist. Jerome set out to prove that Origen was a heretic and that he himself was not. His technique of translating Origen in a way to emphasize and magnify anything suspect.
The following podcast is
Jerome. But, with Rufinus, he went the other direction, and basically anything orthodox he magnified in his translations. And so we have some of Origen's works from both of these people. In fact, some of them are gone, and all we have is the translations from either Jerome or Rufinus. So you have to keep that in mind whenever you're reading Origen through these translators, that one way or another they're going to be biased. So anyway, that's kind of his claim for fame. There's a couple of works of Rufinus that are important in apologetics. One is his explanation of the Apostles' Creed, which was written about 401, 404, and also his two works against Jerome, which are very interesting. Lots of information in that. And that is our Meet the Early Church Father for today, Rufinus. Coming up on the other side of the break, our good friend, Master Apologist, Ken Litchfield's coming up. Stay tuned, folks.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-on Apologetics. And we're going to talk about Christianity and its roots, its evolution from Judaism. Yeah, it's true. Throughout the week, we've been kind of sort of touching on this, actually, the last couple of weeks. And to kind of summarize and bring it all home, we have our good friend, Master Apologist Ken Litchfield with us. Ken, by the way, is a lifelong Catholic and member of Holy Family Parish in Memphis, Michigan. He serves as financial secretary for All Saints Memphis Knights of Columbus Council. And also, as you know, with a story that after reading the Left Behind books, that spurred him to start really studying the Catholic faith and ultimately fall more deeply in it. And ever since then, he's been doing apologetics, answering questions on Catholic Answers live show. He worked as a moderator and contributor for the Bible Christian Society Facebook page. All sorts of great stuff. And Ken Litchfield, welcome to Hands On Apologetics.
Hi, Gary. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me on the show again. And
yeah, it's fun to have you aboard.
Really, I feel really challenged to be the one to have to wrap all this up for everybody.
Oh, no pressure.
Or two of Jewish roots and all that.
Yeah, no pressure. But actually, I want to touch a little bit about how you got interested in apologetics because, we've had you on a few months ago for the first time. You kind of gave your story. Maybe you could just give us a real quick recap about, how you turned from an ordinary Catholic in the pew to active apologist like you are.
Yeah. Well, kind of like you mentioned, I'm a cradle Catholic, just, grew up in the church, would go every Sunday and, said my prayers at night before bed. But, that was pretty much it. So, but after my son introduced me to the Left Behind books, I started digging into the faith because before that, say about 5 years before that, around 2005, I was, starting to take my faith more seriously and wanting to, live the way the church calls us to and go deeper in the faith. And then the challenge of the Left Behind books helped me want to really dig into it. And Scott Hahn and Tim Staples saved me from falling into the rapture trap. And they talked about, that led me to Jimmy Akins and a bunch of other apologists. So, and they kept talking about the church fathers. So then I started getting into the church fathers, and I've always been a fan of ancient history and Egyptian history, so, and the history in general. So going deep into history, you find out the Catholic Church existed from the beginning.
Right. And that ultimately, leads you to do all the writing stuff, and especially your book, which is How Old is Your Church? An Introductory Guide to Catholic Apologetics.
Yeah, that has 25 of my most commonly asked questions. I have an apologetic package of over 150 writings. So if somebody wants the rest of those writings, they can send me an email at kenlitchfield61@gmail.com, and I'll send you the whole package for free.
Awesome. Very good. Well, I love that because it's very similar with me. Sometimes it takes somebody to challenge you on your faith. With you, it was the Left Behind books. With me, it was a fundamentalist Baptist. To, you have a choice. Either just believe and go along with them, or to check with the church to see whether there's an answer. And just like with me, I fell in love with apologetics with the early church fathers, and never regretted it. It's been life-changing.
Mm-hmm. When you know why you believe and what you believe, we can just get that much of a deeper connection with God.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can defend the faith against, people that challenge you then.
Yes, indeed. In fact, why don't we jump into our topic then? It's funny how I think if you talk to the average Catholic in a pew, they know that Christianity came from Judaism, right? But that's usually in a very foggy sense. Jesus was Jewish, and that's pretty much how far the Judaism goes. So why don't you set us off on this track? how did Christianity begin to evolve out of Judaism?
Okay. Well, let's see. First, we kind of have to set the stage. For Catholics, we recognize that, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and the apostles, they were Jews.
Right.
But like Protestants, they also understand that, but they start with the Bible in the 1500s, and then they look in the Bible trying to find out, where's the church structure, and they don't see it in there. Martin Luther, pretty much kept the Catholic tradition, but John Calvin and Zwingli, they don't see it in there. So, and by their sola scriptura concept, if it's not in the Bible, we don't know if it's true. But when you go back in history and you start studying Judaism of the first century and prior to that, then you can see that the structure is already there. And the apostles didn't need to write about the structure too much because it was already there. And Christianity evolved out of Judaism, so it's not like they abandoned Judaism altogether to start a whole new religion from scratch.
Right. Yeah.
So with the first Christians being Jews and Christianity being the fulfillment of Judaism, they took their Jewish synagogue structure, worship structure, and evolved that into Christian worship. And because Gentiles weren't added until like 5 or 10 years later, almost all the first Christians were Jews or God believers that, came to the temple but weren't allowed inside. So at the time of Jesus, there were basically 3 major Jewish groups. There was a whole bunch of other, smaller sects like the Essenes that John Bergsma talked about, and other small Jewish sects that had their own flavor of Judaism. Mm-hmm. But the 3 main groups were the Sadducees, who basically ran the temple worship, and the Pharisees that were trying to keep the Jewish law to the best they could, because they thought if they could just keep everybody from sinning for 30 minutes, then the Messiah would come.
Right.
And then because of the Babylonian captivity and disbursement, there were Jewish sects all around the Greek and then Roman Empire, because the Babylonians, they split up the Jews from their homeland and sent them out all over the place, and they took root there after living there for hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. So the Jews that worshipped in the synagogues, and there were synagogues in Jerusalem too, but they had the rabbi was their leader at the synagogue, and the synagogue communities existed all around the Roman Empire. And that was kind of like the model that was had the most influence on early Christianity, was the synagogue communities. And the Jews already knew how to do this, and so they adapted that to the Christian communities, I guess you'd say. Mm-hmm. So in the synagogues, there were 2 main offices. There was the ruler of the synagogue and the servant of the synagogue. And the office of the ruler of the synagogue became like the bishop in Christianity, and the servant of the synagogue became the deacon. And like John Bergsma mentioned, these 2 offices also kind of developed from the temple worship, where you had the temple priests and the Levites. So you had the main guys and their assistants.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a fascinating connection, because, especially for non-Catholics, it's almost as if Jesus comes and introduces Christianity, which is almost entirely new, coming out of whole cloth. with no precedence, and so Christianity is very simple. It's just the gospel. But the thing is that Christianity, like you said, when it comes out of Judaism, there was already a structure. There was already organization, I should say, that was at work and working well. That all they had to do was just plug into those organizations, and through God's grace and the sacraments and the holy orders, of course, lift it to a new level. So it's not constructing something totally new. It was already there in a sense.
Exactly. They didn't have to start from scratch. They had, as you say, a system already set up, an organization. And like if a Jew left from one synagogue and moved to some other place, he would get a letter from his rabbi that he would take to the next rabbi to show that rabbi that he was a Jew in good standing, in his previous city. Because the synagogue communities, they took care of their widows and orphans and the poor in their synagogue community, but you could also be expelled from your synagogue for sinning. So because you had this community around you to help you and to teach you in the faith and help you worship God, it was important to be connected to a synagogue community. But then when you became a Christian, you joined your Christian community, which was set up basically just like the synagogue communities. And when Paul goes out and preaches, he preaches first in the synagogues, and then he preaches in the public square to the Greeks, after the next day or after the Jews reject him. But Paul first reached out to the Jews, just like the rest of the apostles, but he also reached out to the Greeks. And the synagogue communities all around the Roman Empire, most of them spoke Greek, and they used the Greek Septuagint translation of the Old Testament as their scriptures, because that was the language they knew. Mm-hmm. Here in the U.S., we don't, read the gospel, or we don't read the Bible in, Greek and ancient Hebrew. We read it in English, which is our current language. Right. And for people that don't know Hebrew, Greek would be the natural language for them to use.
Yeah, very good. I hold that thought right there. I hear the music coming up. We're with Ken Litchfield, and we're talking about how Christianity evolved out of Judaism. Stay tuned, folks. More to come on the other side of the break. We'll be right back.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family.
Coming up on the next Empowered by the Spirit with Deacon Steve Greco.
This show is one of the most important shows that we've done because it's a focus on the current pandemic, COVID-19. Bishop David is filled with the Holy Spirit, someone who is right in tune with what we need to do to grow spiritually. And I'm so excited to put it on Virgin Most Powerful Radio. This is a show that will give us encouragement and will give us hope.
Catch Empowered by the Spirit Fridays after the Terry and Jesse Show on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-on Apologetics, and we're chatting with Ken Litchfield and Christianity, how it evolved from Judaism. Before we begin, though, let me remind you again, June 13th, we have Men's Conference at Virgin Most Powerful Radio, live stream with Jesse Romero, Ruben Nava, and Tim Gordon. Also on June 20th, we have Steve Ray giving a virtual pilgrimage. Go to virginmostpowerfulradio.org website, and you can get all the details for those talks. And Ken, during the break, I got a message from the virtual social media section of the dojo. They wanted to know if you could repeat your email address so they could get all your great writings.
Yes, it's Ken Litchfield 61 at gmail.com. I'm putting it in the YouTube notes here right now.
Okay, great. Yeah, so very good. I love having the chat room because we can immediately get questions and answers and all sorts of stuff. But, right before the break, you plugged into something really important. And this is another aspect where Christianity kind of takes the ball and runs with it from Judaism, because there was this ancient Jewish translation of the Hebrew scriptures in the Greek known as this Septuagint translation. And that was used far and wide because the Roman Empire at that time was the lingua franca was Greek, and that was another thing that Christianity kind of, like I said, took the ball and ran with, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Gospels were all written. Well, all the New Testament writings are in Greek. Eusebius says that Matthew's Gospel was originally written in the language of the Hebrews, which could be Aramaic or Hebrew, but then it was translated into Greek. And so when the Greek writers of the New Testament quoted the Old Testament, it was natural for them to add, take their quotes from the Old Testament from the Greek Septuagint, because it's already in Greek. They don't have to take Hebrew and translate that into Greek. So the New Testament generally quotes the Old Testament, the Septuagint version, 80% or more of the time, depending on how picky you want to be on exactly what is a quote and what is not a quote.
Right. Yeah, very
good.
So
around 88, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so yeah, it's not only Christians evangelize using this Jewish translation, but the New Testament itself uses it quite a bit as its preferred text.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So around 80 A.D., the Christians were expelled from the synagogue network because they didn't help with the Jewish revolt in 70 A.D., and Jerusalem was pretty much wiped out. So a lot of the early Christians, being Jews, may have worshipped with their family on Friday and Saturday, and then with the Christians on Sunday. But by 80 A.D., they were no longer welcome in the synagogues. And the Jewish people, they had, at the time of Jesus, they did like a mini Passover on Friday nights, which was the beginning of their Saturday, because for the Jews, the day began at sundown the night before and continued through the day the next day. Because in the book of Genesis, it refers to days as beginning with the evening and in the morning of the next day. So that's how they counted their days. Yeah. And so on Friday night, the beginning of the Sabbath Saturday, they celebrated a mini Passover meal called a Todah, or Thanksgiving meal. And then they worshiped in the synagogue on Saturday, the Sabbath. And during the Last Supper, Jesus evolved the Passover meal into the Eucharist that we have now, the Eucharistic prayer. So that's where that comes from. It's an evolution of the Passover meal. But on the Sabbath, the Jews worshipped in their synagogues, and they would begin with a call to prayer, and then they would have prayers and petitions to God, and then there would be readings from the Torah, and then readings from the prophets and the histories, and then there would be a sermon after that. This is generally speaking what happened in the synagogues. Naturally, there would be variations throughout the Roman Empire, but it's the basic model that they followed. Right. And then there would be psalms of praise after the sermon, and then they would conclude with prayers asking for God's blessing, like the Aaronic blessing. So that became what the Jews did on Saturday, the Sabbath, is our liturgy of the Word on Sunday. And then we have the liturgy of the Eucharist afterward, which is the evolution of the Passover meal. Right. So again, we have Jewish things that were evolved and became what we do in Mass today.
Right. Yeah, very good. Very good. So in a way, Jesus says that you take from the old and the new, because the old is good. So it wasn't Christianity wasn't something whole cloth, but actually the liturgy, the order of worship, the Mass, all these things were there in one shape or another in either the synagogue or the Passover Haggadah, right?
Right.
Yeah.
As Jesus says, he didn't come to abolish the law, he came to fulfill the law.
Right.
And so, Christianity is the fulfillment of Judaism. And there's, many parallels that we can draw between Judaism and Christianity. Like the Jews kept the Word of God, the scrolls in the tabernacle, in the synagogues. And we Catholics keep the Word of God made flesh, Jesus, in the Eucharist, in the tabernacle. And the Jews would stand for the Torah readings during their worship service, and we Catholics stand during the Gospel readings. A lot of the Eastern Rite and Greek churches, they stand throughout the whole liturgy, which can be pretty rough.
Yeah.
I'm glad we have pews in the Catholic Church, Western Catholic Church. Let's see. Yep. Then the Jews brought their boys into covenant with God at 8 days through circumcision, and we Catholics bring our babies into covenant with God through baptism. It was around 150 A.D., I think, there was a synod in Carthage, and they were discussing whether the Christians had to wait till the 8th day to baptize their babies, but they decided at that synod that, you can baptize them at any time. You don't have to wait for the 8th day. But that shows even at 150 A.D., the Christians were still thinking about, at least, the Jewish practice of waiting till the 8th day to baptize their babies. And again connects the idea that baptism is the new circumcision.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, especially, when you think of 8 days, that's the day after the Sabbath is the 8th day which is the day of resurrection. So, strictly speaking, just like you pointed out, how the old law foreshadows the new law, and the Old Testament sacraments foreshadow the New Testament sacraments. You have this pointing towards that there will be this baptism that will be given, like circumcision, that will be powered by the resurrection. So that's really interesting that Carthage had to address whether to strictly follow the 8-day waiting period or not.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And even 150 years later, I guess it would be 120 years later, they're still thinking, on those Jewish lines.
Yeah.
Which shows our Jewish connection.
Right. Yeah. Very
the
good.
Jews also used incense to kind of symbolize their prayers rising to God. Incense was, important in the Holy of Holies at the temple, and also used in the synagogues. A lot of Protestants these days will say, incense, that's what the pagans use, but they don't know their Old Testament enough to understand that the Jews used it too. And a lot of the weird stuff in Catholicism comes from the Jewish practice. It's not stuff we adopted from the pagans, although that's a common myth that Protestants are taught.
Right. Yeah. Just open up the book of Revelation, and you're not seeing pagans worshiping in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
You got incense. You got falling down and prostration. You have all this stuff. But yeah, you're right. That's funny. But I've heard of that too. That incense somehow, for some reason, in the popular imagination, is linked with paganism. When in fact it's deeply rooted in Jewish Old Covenant practice.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I threw you off the point.
That's okay. That's why I have notes. So the Jews confessed their sins to a priest, at the temple, and then they offered something in atonement for their sins. And we Catholics, we confess our sins to our priests, and the repentant sinners do penance and atonement for their sins. We don't have to offer anything to be burnt in the church, but we do have to do something as penance. Mm-hmm. And the Jews wore decorated robes when performing their duties in the synagogue and at the temple. And that's why our clergy, we have fancy robes too. Again, it's adopted from Judaism, not paganism.
Right.
And as I mentioned before, the ruler of the synagogue, his office became the office of the bishop, and the servant of the synagogue became the office of the deacon.
Very good. Well, I hear the music coming up. We're chatting with Ken Litchfield about how Christianity evolved out of Judaism. Stay tuned, folks. More to come on the other side of the break.
Jesus said to the apostles in Luke chapter 10, "Whoever listens to you listens to me, and whoever rejects you rejects me." According to St. Boniface, in her voyage across the ocean of this world, the Church is like a great ship being pounded by the waves of life's different stresses. Our duty is not to abandon ship, but to keep her on course. May our Lord help us remain ever faithful to His Church, to aid and defend her.
Healthcare news today seems to be coming from everywhere and everyone. It's confusing at least and untrustworthy at the worst. Dr. Aceta is a faithful Catholic in the Kern County community. He is trustworthy, well-researched, and will only give expert opinion on matters in his own specialty. Catholic teaching at its entirety is of utmost importance to Dr. Aceta. Give Dr. Aceta a call for your obstetrics and gynecological needs at 661-695-6617.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics, and we're chatting with our good friend, Master Apologist Ken Litchfield, about how Christianity evolved out of Judaism. And, man, if you've missed the last couple of segments, you got to check it out on a podcast, because Ken has listed all these incredible parallels in which Christianity inherited and evolved from Judaism. And Ken, it's truly amazing how many different aspects you could trace back to our Jewish roots.
Yeah, and I'm just scratching the surface here, and I have even more.
Awesome. Well, let's keep going then.
Okay. So the synagogue communities cared for their poor and injured members, and the widows and the orphans, just like I mentioned before. And that's what our modern Catholic Christian communities do too, through St. Vincent de Paul and individual churches. I know my church has a food bank, and we work with other churches in the area. So the work continues on just like in the synagogue communities. And of course, when Catholic Christianity was the only Christianity in Europe, they did the same thing back then. And the synagogue communities, they taught the faith to the Jews in their community. They had their own schools and everything, and that's why we have CCD or faith formation or in our Catholic churches today. So again, it's something that we copy from the Jews. And the Jews that lived outside of Jerusalem, they prayed 3 times a day facing toward Jerusalem. The Muslims, have kind of adopted the same thing where they have to face east toward Mecca and pray, I believe, 5 times a day. But the Didache required the early Christians to pray the Our Father or Lord's Prayer 3 times a day. They didn't necessarily have to face toward Jerusalem,
right.
But they did. The Didache did require them to fast or to pray 3 times a day. And the Jews fasted on Tuesday and Thursday, but the Didache required the Christians to fast on Wednesday and Friday, and we still fast on Friday, either from meat or we do something else for penance. Because if you're a vegetarian, fasting from meat is no kind of penance.
True.
But maybe eating meat would be a kind of penance for a vegetarian. But, we can do service to the poor, pray extra, Bible study, something extra on Friday.
Yeah.
Here in the U.S., when, we were told we no longer had to skip eating meat on Friday, a lot of people forgot about the part where you have to do something else for penance on Friday. They just said, oh, great, we can eat meat.
Yeah, that's true.
And
that's true.
Basically the rule applies to land meat only. Meat that comes from the water, you can still eat that. So that's why we can eat fish and shrimp and I suppose clams too, I'm not sure, or lobster. But again, lobster doesn't seem like much of a penance.
Right.
It's kind of a special food here in the U.S. at least.
Yeah, for me, I'm not a big fish fan, so that definitely is penance in any form.
Okay. So you have to eat fish on Fridays.
That's right. Yeah, it's double penance.
Mm-hmm. So, as Steve Ray mentioned last Friday in Acts chapter 2, it talks about how there were 120 gathered in the upper room, and that was the minimum requirement to form a new synagogue community. So the first Christians, kind of formed their own Christian synagogue out of Judaism because they had enough people to start their own group. And it's kind of interesting, like the 12 represents the 12 tribes of Israel, and 10 is like the number of completeness in Judaism. So 10 times 12 is 120.
Right.
So it's kind of a tie-in there. Whether that was, what Luke was thinking about, I don't know. But, a deeper, interesting little factoid there.
Yeah.
And Paul describes, how to ordain the early clergy in 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy and in Titus. And, he tells Timothy and Titus to lay hands on the men that will become bishops. Some people, point to Paul's specification that a bishop must be a man of one wife and claim that, bishops have to be married. But actually, Paul was making a practical, prudent decision since both he and Timothy were celibate men, but there wasn't a whole lot of other celibate men around. So you have to find a guy who at least only has one wife and not multiple wives. So he wasn't requiring that a bishop be married. He's just looking for bishops or men that only have one wife. Because when you're taking on the duties of a bishop, it's a lot more work.
Right. Yeah.
And the bishops and deacons are mentioned in the Bible, and also the priestly duties are mentioned in the Bible, where Jesus says, this is the cup of my blood poured out for you or many or for all men, depending on the translation. And then he says, do this in memory of me. In the original Greek word, there was anamnesis, which means recreate this again in the future. And that's how the Passover meal was for the Jews. It was a recreation of the original Passover done in a new unit of time. And for the Jews, the male head of the household acted as the priest for his household. And he served as the priest for that household, doing that priestly duty. And Jesus' evolution of the Passover meal tells his apostles to do the same thing. And pouring out the blood in the temple was a duty that only the priests did. So he was ordaining the apostles as priests at that time to offer the sacrifice of Jesus' body and blood like he did at the Last Supper. And then also after the resurrection, Jesus tells his apostles that they have the authority to forgive sins, and any sins they hold bound are held bound in heaven. And any sins they are loosed in heaven. That's in John chapter 20. And Paul writes about his priestly duties in Romans chapter 15. And he writes about, I have a quote here, because of the grace given me by God to be a minister of Christ Jesus to the Gentiles in the priestly service of the gospel of God, so that the offering of the Gentiles may be acceptable, sanctified by the Holy Spirit. And the Greek word that Paul uses for priestly service is hierogonouta, which is the verb form of the Greek word hieros. And in the Bible, hieros is commonly used in reference to the Jewish priests of the Old Testament. So Paul is talking about a priestly duty that he does on the behalf of the Gentiles. because he is a priest, and the men that he ordains also have those same priestly duties.
Yeah.
And it's the same word that's used in Exodus chapter 28 when it talks about Aaron ordaining his sons as priests. It's the same Greek word. And in the Greek Septuagint, the word hieros is used for priests. And when Paul sees his apostolic work through the lens of the priestly work of the Old Testament and his apostolic office as a priestly office. And when the Greek word that Paul uses when he describes himself as a minister of Christ is liturgos, which means public servant. So in the Mass, we have the public servant part in the liturgy of the Word, and then we have the hieros, priestly part, in the liturgy of the Eucharist. So again, it all ties back to the Jewish worship tradition.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, even even the terms like binding and loosing, that comes from that's rabbinical language. It's not something that you would find normally in like Old Testament stuff. So yeah, just great tie-ins. I see it, our time's running out, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the great stuff that you've been doing as far as writing and of course your book. Why don't you give your email address out again as far as the information for that free material that you have?
Sure. You can email me at kenlitchfield61@gmail.com, and I'll send you my apologetic package of 150 plus writings. I have a lot of playlists developed on YouTube on different topics of Christianity. And I'm going to be on our good friend William Hemsworth's show on June 27th.
Oh, yeah.
Great. That's when we're going to record it.
Uh-huh.
I don't know exactly when the podcast will be up after that, but I'm looking forward to that. And I sent William some copies of my book, and he shared it with a friend of his that I also know, Ed Graveline, who does St. Paul street evangelization. Mm-hmm. And Ed wanted to get more copies of my book, and you can find that at Amazon. And the name of the book is How Old Is Your Church? Just type that in your search engine in Amazon, and it'll come up. And, I sold a lot of them, before the big pandemic. So I hope people had time to read it while they were sitting at home.
Hey, there you go. That'd be time well spent, because you do have a lot of information, and it's really well laid out. So I think a beginner would definitely get their feet wet, into the whole range of apologetics. Yeah,
for new converts that are maybe being hassled by their family, it's a great book for that. Mm-hmm. For RCIA students, even like for St. Paul street evangelists, it's a great book for them because they can, answer questions that people might have.
Yeah. Very good. Well, Ken, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Very happy to be here, and I look forward to being on again.
All right. Ken Litchfield, ladies and gentlemen. And, yeah, the book is How Old Is Your Church? Check it out on Amazon. And, man, the hour has just flown. It's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center, turn off the dojo lights, but never fear. Terry and Jesse Show will soon be here. High Impact Catholic Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. And, God willing, we'll be back again tomorrow with Father Gregory Pine. Bye-bye, everybody.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, You can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.